Well, good morning. It sure is good to see everybody this beautiful Sunday morning. Those who've come out to study God's Word with us, we're happy that you're here. If you're visiting, we're especially happy that you could be with us for this Bible study. We're continuing in this class and most of the classes here at Eastside to go through the entire Bible narrative. We're in the period of time in the Old Testament where God's people were taken into captivity, where they stayed for 70 years, and then there'll be the return from captivity and years of silence, during which the revelation of God ceased for about 400 years until the coming of the Christ. So we're in this period: captivity, return, and years of silence. We count 17 Bible periods. This is just one way of organizing Bible history. And we're in Numbers 12, 13, and 14 in our count of the periods of Bible history, ending the Old Testament period. This is a chart that we've shown a few times, and I think it really encapsulates much of what we're looking at this quarter. We've got Jeremiah prophesying in Jerusalem for the time period that we're looking at, much of it before the captivity, through the destruction of Jerusalem, and then after the captivity. And then early in the captivity, Daniel is taken into captivity to Babylon in about 606 BC by Nebuchadnezzar, where he serves in the court of the king of Babylon for 70 years, and into the time when the Persians, the Medes and the Persians, conquered the Babylonians. He still will serve under the Persian kings as well for a time. So Daniel is right during this period of captivity and leading all the way to the time of the return. Ezekiel also prophesies during this time period. He's in a second group of captives, and he spends decades in captivity, also prophesying to God's people there. So a lot of our information for this time period comes from these three prophets. And we've also noted that there's a lot of information outside the Bible about the geopolitical circumstances of God's people and this region. And we'll be looking even at a little bit of that today. But mainly today, we're going now back to the book of Daniel. And Jerusalem has fallen. God's people are fully in captivity. And we'll be looking at Belshazzar and the handwriting on the wall, Daniel chapter 5. This will be the end of the Babylonian Empire at this time. And then also Daniel in the lion's den in Daniel chapter 6. So if you have your Bibles and you want to follow along in your Bible, we'll be here really with two pretty familiar stories, which have some great lessons in them. So the familiarity of the stories, don't let that fool you, because a lot of times when we're kids, we learn some great lessons, but we might not learn some of the greatest lessons that could be learned from some of these things, or look at them as in depth as we otherwise might. All right. So here's the time chart. Again, I think this is pretty valuable. The captivity had begun 606 BC. Daniel and his three friends are taken, as well as many other nobles at this time. And there'll be the return in 636. Daniel will live to see that. He's been in captivity all this time. Judah has fallen, 586. We just talked about that. And the Medes and the Persians will defeat the Babylonians. We'll see that in today's lesson. So it's this time period right here that we're in. This is a depiction of the Babylonian Empire. Here it's called the Neo-Babylonian Empire. There had been one before this time. It had fallen and then now risen again, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, largely under Nebuchadnezzar. It covers quite an expanse, not nearly as much as the succeeding kingdoms will, as we'll see even today. But you see it goes all the way from the Persian Gulf to the border of Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea. Quite an expanse that the kings of Babylon had control over during the height of this empire. So as I said, we're picking up with Belshazzar being the king now in Daniel chapter 5. We'll look a little bit at how he became king and what kind of king he was after we tell the story, but just briefly, he's a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. He's not his immediate son. I believe he's his grandson, as we'll see. But he's called son as in the meaning of descendant in this text. And he comes to power in that way. So he's part of that dynasty. In chapter 5 and verse 1, we find that Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. So he's throwing a big party, lots of important people, 1,000 of them at this extravaganza. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So, again, here Nebuchadnezzar is called his father, but that same word is used in the sense of ancestor. And so he's likely his grandfather, as we'll see. But nonetheless, he's probably already been drinking some wine when he makes this order. That's the indication of the text. He'd already started the wine drinking. And then he decides, well, why don't we bring out the gold vessels from the temple that was in Jerusalem? And we have all their fine vessels, and we're going to bring them out. How would God and the Israelites regard those vessels of the temple? What kind of respect or status do you think that they would give those vessels? They'd be holy, right? Yeah, they'd be holy vessels, sanctified for use in the temple. The temple had been destroyed, but these holy vessels had been taken. And so you can only imagine in the mind of a Jewish person and in the mind of God, apparently, this is profanity of the worst kind. They're defiling that which God has truly set to be holy by using it, of all things, to praise foreign gods and the gods, in fact, of wine and so forth, so on and so forth. So I think one just conclusion that you can make in passing as you're going through here, alcohol doesn't help you make good decisions, ever. And some of the worst decisions that have ever been made have been made by people under the influence of alcohol. That's just got to be a lesson everybody has to get. It's not a good thing. It's never been a good thing. The Bible says in Proverbs 20 and verse 1 that wine is a mocker and strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. So be wise. Don't be led astray by it. And particularly in Proverbs 31 and verse 4, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor princes intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the justice of all the afflicted. Not good for people in leadership positions, especially, to drink wine. Notice again in verses 3 and 4, which I didn't read yet, they brought out those vessels which had been in the house of God in Jerusalem, and they drank from them. They drank wine, and they praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. So all of these false gods that were abhorrent to God and to His holy people, they brought out, and they used the vessels of God's temple to praise them. So while this is going on, suddenly the finger of a man's hand appears writing on the plaster of the wall. So again, just something from God, a sign from God being sent in a way that it was out of the normal conception of a human being. You see this finger appear, fingers of a man's hand writing on the wall, and what in the world is going on, right? It's frightening, it's amazing, all at the same time. So the king's countenance, we're told, changes. It says his thoughts troubled him so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. This is the kind of reaction that you see in some ghost movie or something, right? Where somebody thinks they've seen a ghost. Or in the movie, they could have seen a ghost, I suppose. But it's only in the movie. But this is the fright response that you would get from something like that. Belshazzar is terrified. He is shaking all over at the very sight of this. The king calls for all the wise men of Babylon. Now we've seen this, speaking of movies, we've seen this movie before, where Nebuchadnezzar, when he twice when he has had a dream, called for all of the astrologers and the wise men and the soothsayers to come and tell him what the dream was and the meaning of the dream. And in either case, they were not able to do it. In either of the cases that we've already heard seen in the context of the book of Daniel. But he offers this big reward. Whoever reads and interprets the writing, he's going to give them purple clothing, a chain of gold, promote them to the third ruler of the kingdom. But no one is able to read or interpret its meaning. So here he's offering big reward for anybody that's able to do this, but nobody can do it, not among any of the wise men or the interpreters of dreams as they were supposed to be. None of them were capable of doing that. They came together, but they could not make known to the king its interpretation, verse 8. So he's greatly troubled now. His countenance has changed, and his lords are astonished. He is in fear. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know how to know what's going on. And I'll just make a couple of notes in the passing of this as we pass through this story. The promise that Belshazzar makes to whoever would interpret the dream is a little bit odd in that normally when such a promise, kings made these kinds of promises if their people would do great things off and on throughout history and throughout the Bible. But normally you would think, well, he wouldn't promise somebody to be the third in command. He'd promise him to be the second, right, after him. And it's very likely the reason he didn't promise the second is because he was the second. His father was actually the crowned king at this time, but just happened to be away as he tended to be. And again, we'll talk about that some more in a minute. So that's probably why he promises the third rank in the kingdom instead of the second rank. And also the queen here may not be his queen, but may be his mother, the queen, if what I'm saying is true. And her understanding of history then would make a little bit more sense in that case. So let's see what the queen says in verse 10. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whose spirit is the spirit of the holy God. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, and again, ancestor, I think, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Now, we already read where that happened. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, twice in the book of Daniel, it is said that he has an excellent spirit. He excelled. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting in dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas was found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. So that's the suggestion of the king, of the queen to the king. She reminds him of all of this. And it's a good thing that she does. So Daniel is called, and Daniel interprets the writing. He, first of all, declines Belshazzar's reward. He says, you can keep all that stuff. I don't need that, but I'll be happy to interpret your dream, or the God of heaven will do that. In verses 13 through 17. When you get to verse 18, O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom, majesty, glory, and honor. Because of the majesty he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whomever he wished, he put down. There's the power that he had. But when his heart was lifted up, although, as we saw, Nebuchadnezzar is a great and powerful king, the most powerful of his day and time, Yet his heart was lifted up. He was proud. He was walking, as we studied in our last class period, and praising himself for how great his kingdom was and what he'd accomplished. He was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took the glory from him. He was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was like the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdoms of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. Daniel reminds Belshazzar of what Nebuchadnezzar had to be taught by God. That God is in charge. Kings serve at the pleasure of God. He raises them up. He sets them down. And he can do whatever he wants in the affairs of man. Yet Daniel notices that although Belshazzar knew all of that, he had failed to humble himself and had had the temerity to take the vessels of gold, the holy things, from the temple of this God who had shown himself to be all-powerful, who had shown himself to be in control of the nations and the interpreter of dreams and all of that. He'd taken the vessels from the temple of that God and defiled them. Verse 22, you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this. And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, you and your lords, your wives, your concubines. You've drunk wine from them, and you praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. The foolishness of idolatry is, plainly on display really throughout all the Old Testament, as the true God of heaven demonstrates his power in contrast to the gods who can do nothing, and yet who men set up because that's what they want. They want a God of their own liking who they imagine will give them their fleshly desires. Belshazzar knew all of this, and yet did not honor the God of heaven. So, when we reject truth, when we reject the truth about God, we do a lot of foolish things. We sometimes will try to justify ourselves in those foolish things. Actually, most all of the time, we try to justify ourselves in those foolish things. But God and his truth stand the same. In the next section, then, Daniel interprets the writing. There are three words that are written on the wall: many, tekel, and upharsin. Many is a word which refers to something being numbered, counted, analyzed. And so God has numbered your kingdom, Daniel tells Belshazzar. Tekel means you've been weighed in the balances. In Aramaic, these are Aramaic words, tekel is defined by Brown, Driver, and Briggs in their Hebrew lexicon. To weigh or to be weighed. So he has been weighed and he's been found wanting. Upharsin has the idea of division. Your kingdom has been divided so as to fall, in essence, is the point of that. What Daniel is revealing, what God has revealed here then, is that Belshazzar's time is up. The time of the Babylonian kingdom is up. God has weighed it all out. He has judged it. The days are numbered, and it's going to fall. Belshazzar has more presence than one would expect at this point in time, having been terrified. He gives the command that they clothe Daniel with the purple and the chain of gold and all that, although Daniel said he didn't really want any of that. He made a proclamation concerning him that he should be third ruler in the kingdom. So he's given that privilege and position. In verse 30, you have this. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Darius the Mede, we'll talk about him some more in a minute, indicates that now the Medes and the Persians have entirely taken over Babylon. The artifact that you're seeing on the screen now is known as the Nabonidus Chronicle. I haven't told you about Nabonidus yet, but Nabonidus is actually Belshazzar's father and was technically the king of Babylon at this time. But Nabonidus didn't like to stay home. He liked to go on adventures and lead troops elsewhere. You know, he was one of these knights on errand kind of kings. And so he was not at home. Very much he was not at home. And so he left his son to rule the kingdom while he was out truly gallivanting. This chronicle references a good bit of that, explaining that he was gone, absent during crucial times during his reign. The great king that brought the Medes and the Persians together was a man by the name of Cyrus. He was a Persian. The Persians had allied themselves with the Medes on equal footing at first, but Cyrus was by far the stronger leader and the better administrator. And so he becomes the king over all the Medo-Persian Empire, united it about 550 BC, leading right up to this time. The day and time that the Medes and Persians conquer the Babylonians is etched in history, so we know exactly when it was that this happened, 539 BC, in October of 539 BC is when this occurrence that we just read happened. The Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote in the 5th century BC, so not very long after this, tells about how Cyrus conquered Babylon, which is a well-fortified city, but he actually altered the course of the Euphrates River that ran through Babylon. He penetrated the city, which had significant fortifications, but he did that by just walking into the city on what was then a dry riverbed and taking the city. 150 to 200 years before this, in the reign, around the reign of Hezekiah, during Isaiah's prophesying, Cyrus had been named by God as the ruler who would free the captives of Israel. Now, Cyrus hadn't been born yet. Israel hadn't gone into captivity yet when it was prophesied that a man by the name of Cyrus would set the captives free. This is Isaiah 44 and verse 28. God says of Cyrus, "He's my shepherd. He shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid." So Cyrus is prophesied about rebuilding the city, rebuilding the temple, and all of that. Isaiah 44 and also into Isaiah 45. 2 Chronicles 36 and the book of Ezra record that, in fact, Cyrus was the king of Persia. He made a proclamation throughout all of his kingdom that all the captives would go home and rebuild their cities and rebuild their temples. And that happened. Darius the Mede, who's mentioned here, becomes king of Babylon, but I would say he's a king who's ruling under Cyrus, and he's been given the Babylonian rule as sort of concession to the Medes, who were allied with the Persians at this time. Darius the Mede is not known to history. but Cyrus certainly is. This is the Cyrus cylinder, which is one of the most famous artifacts of history, on which Cyrus records his program of religious tolerance, sending all the captives that the Babylonians had made, sending all of them back to their homes, letting them rebuild their temples and rebuild their cities. At the bottom of this, part of the translation of it, the holy cities beyond the Tigris, whose sanctuaries had been in ruins for a very long time, the gods whose abode is in the midst of them, I returned to the places and housed them in lasting abodes. I gathered together all their inhabitants and restored to them their dwellings. And that's exactly what the Bible records him doing. So this is the time frame we're looking at. This is what is just happening and has happened and is happening in the story that we're telling. The Medo-Persian kingdom, or just the Persian kingdom as it comes to be known, is extensive, and it dwarfs the Babylonian kingdom. It goes, instead of just to the Persian Gulf, it goes all the way to the border of India and takes over most all of Greece and most all of Egypt. So it's twice as large or more than the Babylonian kingdom that it conquered. Becomes a huge force in the Middle East during this time of the return from captivity. These are the kings of Babylon. Nabopolassar was Nebuchadnezzar's father. Nebuchadnezzar, there were a series of kings that really didn't work out for about 6 years, and then Nabonidus becomes king in 556 and reigns to 539 with his son Belshazzar really being the one in Babylon who was conquered and killed by the Medes and Persians. That brings us, anybody have a question about all that fascinating history? Or a comment? That brings us to Daniel 6 and the even better known story of Daniel and the lion's den. So you open up Daniel 6. We've just been told at the end of Daniel 5 that Darius the Mede received the kingdom being about 62 years old. So it pleased Darius in Daniel 6 to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom. So he's organizing now the kingdom under Medo-Persian rule. And over these, there were 3 governors. And he apparently recognizes also the excellence of Daniel and his administrative skills, and that there was really something special about him. So he includes Daniel as one of the 3 governors that's kind of over everybody. And this Daniel, it says in verse 3, distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because, again, an excellent spirit was in him. The king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. Why should I be bothered with all of this when I've got somebody here that would really take care of it? Probably he's thinking. So he can semi-retire and let Daniel take it. Well, that's not setting well with everybody else, the other governors and rulers. So in verse 4, the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. They couldn't find a charge or a fault because he was faithful. Here's a man who could be counted on in every respect. He's honest, he's transparent, he's capable. There was no fault or error to be found in him. And they said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So they saw Daniel's faithfulness in his religion as well. So these jealous and envious leaders, they come to the king and they tell the king a lie. I don't know if we've ever thought about that. But what they tell the king is a lie, because what they tell him is, verse 7 of Daniel 6, all the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps and counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Does anybody see where the lie is there? All the governors agreed to this. Daniel was a governor, right? So not all the governors agreed to this. But that's what was told. That's what was told. It's amazing what people believe. Uh, and as a result of that, uh, it appeals to Darius's ego. He thinks everybody wants it and everybody wants to go along with it, and why not, so to speak. Daniel knows the writing is signed, and he goes home and he opens his windows toward Jerusalem and he prays 3 times that day, as had been his custom since early days. Now, somebody tell me how long Daniel had been in captivity at this point. 70 years. Right at 70 years. So he's been in captivity right at 70 years. He's an old man. Have to be in his early 80s, one would imagine, if not older. So he's seen a lot. How long has he been praying 3 times a day? 70 years at least. Since early days, this was his habit. He's a man of prayer. God had told the people when Solomon constructed the temple, he said, later on when you're taken into captivity, you pray toward this place. Well, the temple wasn't even standing, but still, certainly Daniel would pray toward that place, to the place where God had set his name and made his promises. Daniel, as we know the story, is discovered violating the decree of the king. So when the king is told about this in verses 12 through 15, he's not like Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar got mad at Daniel and his friends at times, especially Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we know. But this is a different kind of king, and he likes Daniel. He doesn't want to have to hurt Daniel. And he's mad at himself for being tricked into signing this decree that hurt, his favorite governor, the one he thought the most of. But the thing about the laws of kingdoms at this time, that was this way in Babylon, it was this way with the Medes and Persians. Once you made a law, the king himself was virtually regarded as a god. Well, that couldn't be changed, so you can't change the law. He tried to figure out a way to get it changed, but it couldn't happen. So he commands that Daniel be cast into the lion's den, as the decree had declared must be done. But the king gave the command to do that, but he said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Darius had respect for the God of Daniel. He must have known or heard the kinds of things that Daniel did under the reign of the Babylonian kings. But Daniel was put in the den, and the lion's den was covered with stone and sealed with the king's royal seal, so nobody could get in and out of there. The king, as a show of concern, fasts all that night. Early the next morning, he hurries to the den to check on Daniel. This is in verses 18 and 19. He comes to the den, and he wants to know whether or not Daniel is alive. He comes to the den, he cries out with a loud, lamenting voice, in sadness and sorrow for what must have happened to Daniel. The king spoke, saying, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" And Daniel responds, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I have done nothing wrong to you." The king was exceedingly glad, and commands that Daniel's accusers and their families be thrown to the lions. And then he makes this decree, starting in verse 25. "To all peoples, nations, languages that dwell in the earth, peace be multiplied. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. He's the living God, steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed. His dominion shall endure forever. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lion's den. So Daniel is saved, and the text tells us that Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So here Cyrus is mentioned in the text. What do we get out of all that? What lessons do you see for us today out of those two chapters?
I thought about when Belshazzar didn't learn what happened to Nebuchadnezzar.
And a lot of people don't learn from a lot of other people. We don't, folks. I agree with Jimmy completely. It didn't seem like Belshazzar learned anything from Nebuchadnezzar. Judah hadn't learned anything from Israel's sins. But somehow we think, that what happens in clear sight to somebody who disobeys God ain't going to happen to us. And the devil convinces us, or we allow ourselves to be convinced that it doesn't apply to me. That's not going to happen to me. But God's the same God, and His will is not flexible, and His justice is pure. So I thought about a couple of things. Daniel 5, again, shows God's dim view of human pride, His outrage at the defiling and profaning of holy things. I mean, all throughout the Bible, pride is the thing that God is not going to tolerate. And He'll bring people down every time. You see it over and over again. In Daniel 6, you're reminded that God rules in the kingdoms of men. Schemes and plots to harm those you envy are not going to turn out well. Both of those things, I think, are pretty plain in Daniel chapter 6. There are other lessons that could be learned as well. All right, so we'll stop there and pick up as we continue through our syllabus on Wednesday night. Thank you for good attention.